And without any further ado, I'll hand you over to my colleague Louise McAward-White for this super interesting session.
Thanks so much, Lucy, and good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining me at 7:30 in the morning. If you are eating breakfast, I am jealous. I'm looking forward to having mine after this session. Please do feel free to use the chat, talk between yourselves. I will be keeping an eye on it. The kind of structure of this session is that I'm going to give a bit of a presentation with some slides talking through how to research an organization. And the reason that I thought it was really important to have this here, oh, that's too many slides forward, is because it's really easy to say, oh, make sure you do your research. But actually, what does that research look like? Where can you go and what can you do? And then how can you make sense of what it means for you and your career and your work? And this is based on a while ago, I wrote a blog on this for the Fair Museum Jobs website. So a lot of this is available as a reference material on there as well. There's also been some questions submitted in advance on Eventbrite, which I will talk through after I've given the kind of slides bit of the presentation. And then we'll come on to answering the questions that you've put in the chat after that. That's probably the easiest way to get through, I think. So yeah, do put questions, observations, and also suggestions if there's other things that I haven't mentioned that you've researched that have been useful for you. We'd really love to hear it, and we would love to then add that into our blog so that other people know that that option exists. We'll credit you, of course, if we do that. So how to research an organization. So I'm assuming that when you're thinking about researching an organization, it's for a couple of reasons. Number one, you are just interested in it in the terms of your future career and you think you might want to work there. Number two, there's a job being advertised that you think might be for you and you want to apply, but you want to know a bit more. Or potentially you already work there and you're thinking about what other sources of information might exist about your organization. The question first to assess is, why should you bother doing this research? Potentially, we spend a third of our time at work. This is quite a lot of time, and we deserve to be treated well in our workplaces. We deserve to have the best time we can at work. This doesn't mean that every day is a dream, but it at least means most days are better than other days, which I know can be a sort of difficult thing to gauge, but it is definitely worth thinking about. It's important, I think we all know in this sector that not all organizations are equal. I bet if you think in your mind, you can bring to mind an organization where you just know that some of their practices aren't as good as you would like them to be. And that could be an organization you've worked for or one you know about. Thinking from a Fair Museum Jobs perspective, I know there are organizations that perhaps come up for us more than others in our DMs and in our emails and when we see jobs being advertised. And overall, really, the fact is knowledge is power. You can do something with the knowledge you have, and it will give you about information about making those choices and what you can do. So where can you start? You can always start with open public information. And some of these are searches you can run. But the first thing is to just think about any word of mouth that you know. So you might know someone who has worked there or had something to do with an organization. I recognize that this is privilege. Not everyone is going to have that, especially if you're first starting out in the sector. So don't worry too much if you don't know anybody. That's fine. But if you do, ask them. People don't mind being asked. And when I say no, it could be someone you know on Twitter. So I saw a job being advertised at the Imperial War Museum, for example, and I wanted to know a bit more about the kind of working atmosphere. What it was like, because I didn't really have any experience of it. So I found someone on my Twitter who I had interacted with a little bit in the past. And I thought, I'm going to just drop them a line and say, I've seen this job. I'm thinking about applying. What can you tell me about this organization? And most of the time, people will be happy to give you that information because either they like where they work and they want to encourage other people to work there, or they don't like where they work and they want to discourage other people from working there. So there's plenty to kind of find out just by asking someone if you can. If you can't, don't worry, there are still loads of other things you can look for. I recommend, especially for larger organizations, but not exclusively for larger organizations, just doing a general Google search. So search for the name of museum in Google, also Wikipedia. If you find a museum that has a controversies section on its Wikipedia, you know there's some stuff that you should probably inform yourself about. This could be about probably it's about their museum practices more generally, but it's definitely worth having a read. Also have a look at kind of if you search on Google, but then search for the news specifically, it will bring you any headlines. And a lot of those can be local news headlines, which will give you an insight into the kind of work that organization is doing as well. So you can see if the kind of work that gets reported by their local papers is of interest to you. You'll also get often information about things like funding that they might have received and things like that. And I think, yeah, Lucy's made a really good point in the chat about Wikipedia. It's a neutral point of view, but if something has been included with references on Wikipedia, then there's something there that you need to investigate. I think that's definitely true. There's a website which some of you may have heard of. If you haven't, it's called Glassdoor. And Glassdoor is a website where people can submit reviews of working at an organization. And this can give you a really interesting insight into the working environment. So I've been completely upfront here, and most of the examples you'll see here are of my current workplace. I work at the British Film Institute in my day-to-day job. And what you can see on the screen here are some screenshots of the Glassdoor page for Wikipedia. The Glassdoor page for the British Film Institute, sorry, words. And what you can see is overall, it has a fairly okay rating. 3.6 is not bad, not good. And there's a bit of information about whether people would recommend working there to a friend, whether people approve of the CEO, although the CEO has changed a couple of times since this person. We have a new CEO from this year, so you might want to have a look at what information is. And then people can submit reviews like this one below. So this person did not have a great time working at the BFI, and you can read about the pros and cons that they've pointed out. And there's also an option to submit some advice for the management. And you can see that they found that there was a bit of a hostile environment, and there wasn't always expenses paid and things like that. So I'm not going to reflect on whether this represents my experience or not, but the important thing is it is open for people to post that information and put it on the website. And also you can submit your own review. Sorry, I had to move my camera because I couldn't see all of my screen. So I just gave you just a shot of lower down my body. Sorry, I will keep in my mind to keep my camera up where I can. So you can submit your own reviews of your workplace, which will then help people make better decisions about working there in the future, which I think is a really valuable thing to think about. You can also have a look on social media. So of course, you're going to have the corporate accounts for the organization. Most are going to have some social media of some form. But you can have a look at how they're using it. Is it just a promotional tool where they talk about events? Are they genuinely interacting with other people? What is that? What does that look like? What's the feel of and the tone of their social media? And the same goes for the website. Is it actually an accessible website? Is it a good website? Can you find what you want to know about them? Is it useful? Is the stuff that they're talking about interesting? All of these kind of general public bits of information can give you an insight into what they're prioritizing. Lucy's asked in the chat whether Glassdoor is UK based. No, it's international. So you can find actually for American organizations, especially, there tends to be more information than there is for some of the British ones. I don't think it's quite taken off as much in the UK yet, but it is definitely a useful source of information. The next thing to think about is who is in charge of that organization? What is the governance and management of that organization like? So it's good to know who's making decisions, where the money's coming from, and where money is going. So the first thing you can do is look at their own website. I don't think I've encountered a website for any organization that doesn't have at least a basic About Us section. And I've put a picture here of a bit of the About the BFI page that just tells you kind of what the BFI does. And on that page, you can usually find policies and reports, especially annual reports and things like that. So it's worth having a good look through the About Us section. This is also good interview preparation and application preparation, because you can see what they're currently working on, what's currently important to that organization, and use that in your preparation for any applications. You can also, if they're a charitable organization or a company, you can either look on Charity Commission or Companies House websites. And on here, there are things that legally have to be reported for organizations. So I've put a screenshot here of the page relating to the BFI for their most recent report. And you can see down here a lot of the things that you would be able to find. Trustees, governance, financial history, accounts, annual returns, and all kinds of other things. Just give me a moment. Sorry. I can't see my whole slide at once, so I have to remind myself what my pictures are of. So you can, go on there and have a look, and it will give you a lot of information, especially about who is in charge in terms of trustee boards, directors, and things like that. And on this website, you can also see, if you see the name of a trustee, it will show you any other things that they're also a trustee or director of, which I think can be quite interesting. So you can see kind of where the influence might be and how involved someone might be in the local area, say for a smaller organization, or say for the BFI. Are they engaged in other film related activities or archival or things like that? So you can get a bit of an insight into what people's priorities might be. There will almost always be annual reports for organizations. I've put a little excerpt of a few reports that are available for the BFI down on my slide. And the annual report normally will be published on the website, and it will describe kind of what people have been working on during the year that report comes to, but it will also importantly contain the accounts. So you can see what money's coming in and what money's going out against certain headings. So you can see how much they are spending on particular projects, what particular grants they might have got in, and things like that. For larger organizations particularly, you might want to have a look as well at sponsors. So a lot of this depends on your kind of personal values to what might be important to you. So if you feel really strongly about particular funders not being acceptable, then things like, for example, things like oil sponsorship, then it's worth doing that research in advance, because your personal values are important, and you can sort of make decisions about whether you want to work somewhere based on kind of what they're doing in terms of sponsorship. And then also have a look into who is at the top of the organization, the director, the manager, the CEO. They could have, there's loads of different names that role could have, but have a look into them. You can Google them as well. Have a look. You might be able to find them on LinkedIn and have a look. Don't be afraid of looking on LinkedIn for individual people. Like, we're all kind of used to seeing 5 people have looked at your profile and one of them works at such and such a place. Like, it's not particularly weird to see that, but you can always log out of your own LinkedIn if you have one, do the search, and then it won't show up, which I've definitely never done in the past. No, who would do that? So you can have a look. If you don't want someone to see, there is an option as well. So the next thing to think about is policies and public statements. So I think it's really important to recognize that just because somewhere has a policy, it doesn't mean that they are doing anything. It means they've written that they're doing something. And I think we've all can think of times where someone's had a policy but not followed it. So this is about seeing what they've committed to. It isn't going to tell you necessarily how things are implemented and what they do. So I'll preface with that. And also the same goes for public statements. I think we all know loads of organizations who've made a Black Lives Matter statement back earlier in the year, but since then we have no evidence that they have done anything. And I think it's really important to think about the follow-up. So if you know that someone has made a statement about something that is important to you, look for evidence of what that organization might have been doing since then. A lot of organizations will want to tell you about that, so you can look into these things. Some of these policies will be published probably on websites, or if not the full policy, certainly information about it, particularly in terms of things like accessibility, Black Lives Matter, environmental policies. There's always usually something about sustainability. There's often a bit about equal pay, and we're going to come on to that in a few moments as well. But you can also make these inquiries if you're thinking of applying. There's nothing wrong with contacting an HR contact on an application, listed on an application, to say, can I please know more about your flexible working policy, if that's something that's important to you. I think a really good exercise is to think about your personal priorities. If it's an absolute line in the sand for you to have flexible working, then ask upfront. If you know that you need that and you want to work at an organization that values that thing, ask them before you apply, because you need to know it. Otherwise, you're applying for something that might not be right for you. So you're wasting your own time, which is, to me, almost more important than whether you're wasting an organization's time. You have to put in a lot of time doing an application. You want to know if it's going to be worthwhile for you. So if there's something on this list that is really important to you, pick that thing and make that the thing that you focus on getting as much information about as you can. There are also a lot of workplace accreditations that exist, and these will almost always be advertised by the organization on the application information, might be on the person spec, the job description, their recruitment pages. They'll often talk about any of these that they have. Or you can go to the websites for all of these things and search for organizations that have this accreditation. And there's a lot of them, and some of them are local as well. So some of the ones on here are kind of London based that I've picked on, but that doesn't mean that that doesn't exist elsewhere in the country, or you might have another local initiative that is similar. So it is worth looking into these kinds of things. For example, it would be particularly important to me that everyone at the organization was being paid a living wage. So I would want to know if that organization was a living wage employer before I made any decisions about working there. It's also worth, a lot of this is about employment and workforce, but it is also worth knowing whether that museum is accredited or not. And you can find that on the Arts Council website. And again, accreditation isn't a guarantee that every practice is being followed, but it is a guarantee that they're trying to meet a particular standard. And often this will, again, be in the application information. You'll be able to see that. And if an organization is working towards any of these accreditations and you'd be involved with them, that will often be in the job description as well. So it is worth thinking about those. And as I say, they aren't a guarantee. None of them are a guarantee that people are doing the things that they say they're doing, but it does show at least that they are trying to do some of these things. Thinking a bit about statistics. So are there published statistics about the workforce? So some organizations will publish statistics. The best possible practice is to publish full workforce and pay gap data. Gender is legally required if you are over 250 staff. So you have to report the gender pay gap in the UK if you are. And this, you can find all of that data on the government website. I've put the link in the slide. I think Lucy is pasting links in the chat for me as well. So you can search for all organizations and their gender pay gap data that's been submitted. Some smaller organizations do their gender pay gap data and publish it on their own websites, even though they legally don't have to. It's good practice to. Better practice, I mean, the best possible practice is not just to do gender, but to also publish your ethnicity, disability, LGBTQI+, gender pay gaps and workforce information, but also to publish targets and action plans for how you are improving and solving any issues that come up from that data. That's like kind of the gold standard, and not a lot of organizations are doing it. And there is a movement to publish a government petition, I think I've seen, to publish ethnicity pay gap data, and that's really taking a lot of traction. So I think that will probably happen at some point. It will become legally mandatory, but at the moment it's not. So organizations that do it are doing a good thing by publishing that information. If they are Arts Council England funded, they'll have creative case data about their workforce, and you can go and look that up as well. And that includes some of this kind of same type of data, but I think there's also some reflections on things like social class and things like that. So it's a bit more than you might get otherwise. And also do have a look at what you can find out about trustees in terms of statistics. We were talking in the trustee session yesterday about how boards often fall into the phrase male, pale and stale. So that's white, older men are often on trustee boards. So you can see what they might be doing for their board to make it more diverse and inclusive as well. So it's worth having a look about that. So you can also think about how staff might be supported in that organisation. So you can find out if there are any recognised or active unions. And someone in the chat has asked how to find out if there are any unions at that workplace. And actually, sometimes it can be as simple as Googling union, insert name of organization, because sometimes that will just be published information. But it's also something that I've asked when applying. I've asked after I've been offered a job, can you tell me about the staff support in place? Because that's important to me and it helps me make a decision about whether I want to take that job. So I've outright asked some of those questions. I want to know about the unions. And often hiring managers don't know when you're having that conversation. So it is quite interesting to ask if that's important to you. You can ask about staff networks, people of color networks, LGBTQI+ networks. And some organizations might have networks for particular roles. So women in tech could be one of them. I've worked at organizations that have networks for kind of coordinator and PA level staff to kind of get together and share practice and support each other. And you can ask about some of those. And sometimes that will be published in the application information or on their websites as well. Something else that's quite important to me is mental health support. So what exists? What are they doing on mental health? Is there training for staff and line managers? Do you have mental health first aiders? What access is there to services? There is something called the Time to Change pledge, which some organizations have signed. And unfortunately, that is closing next year, Time to Change, which is a shame, but it's still something that organizations have signed up to. So you can have a look, and it's about a commitment to being more public about mental health in the workplace and providing that support. So it's something I find personally quite interesting. You can find out if there's an employee assistance program. Employee assistance programs are outsourced companies that supply employee support, and this can vary a lot in what it looks like. So often they will offer access to legal advice, access to counseling, online training. Sometimes they have kind of discount clubs that you can join and be involved in. So there's a lot that an employee assistance program might cover. So they might offer one of those. That's particularly true, I would say, of larger organizations. So national or nationally styled organizations, local authorities will almost 100% definitely have an employee assistance program of some kind. And it's also important to think about what your access to training and development might be. So in the role that you might be thinking about applying for, would you have access to training? How's it supported? Is there a budget? And I think this is something it's fine to ask about at interview stage. You know, if I get this role, what opportunities will there be for me to take part in professional development? What in-house professional development do you offer? Do you support people to speak at conferences and events and things like that? All of that is very valid to know about for your kind of general career development, I think. Yeah, Lucy has made a really good point in the chat. If you're researching a local authority or council-run museum, those policies that we're talking about and that information might not be on the museum website. It might be on the council website. So wherever you would make the application is where I would expect to probably see that information. So if you're going through a local authority recruitment portal, somewhere in that kind of area is where I would expect this kind of information to be published. So coming on to the real nitty gritty of things, we all need money to live. We need to pay the bills and we need to exist in the world, and you need money to do that. So you can think about the salary that is being offered. I mean, firstly, if that job that you're thinking of applying for doesn't list a salary or it says competitive, come and tell us at Fair Museum Jobs so that we can tell them exactly why that is discriminatory practice that they need to stop. It is not acceptable to not publish a salary. It is disadvantaging to loads of already marginalized candidates. We've written a blog about this, and I think we're going to be talking about it in some of the sessions later today as well. So this is assuming that they are publishing a salary. So you can check the salary against the Museums Association salary guidelines, or if it's not a museum job, if it's in archives, you've got the Archives and Records Association. If it's conservation, you've got the ICON salary guide, and there's a few others, I think as well. I will say with the Museums Association salary guidelines, they are a few years old. So they are a useful starting point, but they are not the kind of be all and end all of the discussion. So you can see if they're sort of pitching in the right kind of area. So have a look. Almost more important though on how much they're paying and what that looks like against published guidelines is, can you afford it? You need to know what you can afford to live on, and there will be a line, and it's good to do that maths. I personally have a spreadsheet because I am super cool and into spreadsheets. That's the price of working in collections documentation. So I have a spreadsheet with formulas that I use to work out how much I need to exist, and that is what I will use to make decisions about salary. And knowing how much the commute will cost you for a particular job is really important, because that can take a massive chunk out of what you really take home. So do think carefully about the salary and what it means for you. The salary as published isn't always the final argument either. I think if you get offered a job, you can negotiate on salary, and we're going to be talking a lot more in the pay and contracts session on Saturday about this. And I did a podcast with the Archives and Records Association section for museums, where I talked about kind of how to negotiate a salary as well. So don't be afraid to negotiate. It is a good thing. The worst that can possibly happen if you try to negotiate a salary is they say no, and then you make a decision based on that information. Also on this slide is quite a complex calculation for an average salary at the organization. So I'm not going to talk through this in full, but if you go to the Fair Museum Jobs website, fairmuseumjobs.org, and have a look for the blog called Good, Bad, and Ugly, you will find this information, and you can work through how to calculate an average salary at the organization using information in the accounts and the information published about the number of staff in particular salary bands. I will say it is a little bit complicated, so set aside some time. If you're thinking of doing this, you need to kind of think it through. Lucy has posted a link in the chat, which is fab. So you can go and have a look at that and work through if you want to work out an average salary at that organization. So what can you do with this information? What are the next steps that you can take forward? I think the most important thing when you're doing all of this research is knowing what's important to you personally. So think about your personal values and decide what the most important things are for you in where you want to work. And it's good to have a core list of a few things. If you've got a core list of 10, it's sort of the same as dating. You're never going to find someone who meets every single one of your criteria. Or house hunting, you're never going to meet a house that has everything you want. So you need to know what the most important things are that you want, and prioritize doing the research about those things. And then know what it is that you might be willing to compromise if, say, it's the perfect job, a job that you really want, that is a clear step for you. You know how it fits into your career. You really are passionate about the project or the work. That's the right job. And sometimes doing the right job in the wrong organization is still a good choice. And it's about kind of working out what that is for you. And sometimes it might be that it's the right timing. The timing could be that you need to relocate across the country for reasons out of your hands. And you might feel that you don't always have the luxury to make that choice. And actually, something that came through on Eventbrite is about when you're early in your career and you need a job, you don't always feel like you can be picky. And I would say that getting this information and using it isn't about being picky. It's about knowing your priorities. And that doesn't make you picky. It's about knowing when you want to do something and when you want to compromise. And I can certainly speak for myself and say that I've taken a job at an organization that maybe didn't fit all of my criteria because I needed a job at that time. But it's about knowing the place of that job for you in the wider sense. It might be temporary. It might be filling a gap that you have in your CV that you really want to solve. And then you know you're not going to be at that job forever. So you can make different decisions. I'm not telling you what is and isn't right for you, just giving you a kind of toolkit of things that you can bear in mind. When thinking about making applications, if there's information that is utterly key to you that you can't find, contact the person listed in the job ad and ask about it. You are allowed to ask those questions if they're really important to you. And it's the same at interview. Don't be afraid to ask about things that are deal breakers. They are interviewing you, but you are also interviewing them and that organization. And pay attention to what you experience when you're there and what you hear and who else you interact with that isn't the hiring manager and the people on the interview panel. And I know that actually this is quite a lot more difficult at the moment because you're interviewing on Zoom. You're not having an interaction with, say, a front of house staff member when you arrive, or a receptionist, or a volunteer when you go to the site for your interview. You're not getting as much of an experience. And that's going to make things a bit more difficult, and it makes it a bit more difficult to get a kind of vibe of an organization, a kind of feeling when you step through the door. But just all we can do is the best we can with what we have in front of us. And it's also okay if you do all this research, you get a job, you ask the right questions, you think, yep, this is right for me. And then you've been in the job 6 months and you're like, actually, I'm not sure this is right for me. It's completely normal for that to happen, and it's okay. It's what you do next that is important. So do you decide to stay because the project adds a lot to you and you want to take it forward so you can then on your next job go in a different direction, or getting line management experience, budget experience, project management experience? It's all about placing that job and that organization in your overall path, rather than putting all the stock in the situation you're in now, I think. And I think something else that we can all do is think about our current workplace. Is there something we could do better? Are there things that we could publish that would help people know whether to come and work for us? And that's both in a positive and negative way. If you work somewhere that you love, where everyone is so supportive and you wish there was more information about that organization, you can put that out into the world. And then when people search, it will exist and be there for people to find. I think that's really important. And it's the same with something negative. And you might not feel that you can personally, publicly share that because you still work there and you don't want to jeopardize where you are. And that is completely normal and fine. But you might want to think about other ways you can share that. So could you share it through Fair Museum Jobs, for example? Could we share your experience? Could you publish a review on Glassdoor that's all the reviews there are anonymous, that gives an insight into what you think people need to know? I think the key thing is it's only by all of us raising the bar on this that and having these conversations openly about doing better and being better, that we can actually become better in all of these practices. I think that's something that's really key and important to think about. So I've got plenty of time for questions. I am going to think about some of the questions that have been sent through on Eventbrite first, while you guys can all put your questions in the chat. I'm going to stop my screen share because it's very pale in my background and I can't properly see. So let me just bring up my list of Eventbrite questions, and do put questions in the chat. I can see that some of you have been asking some things and Lucy has been answering very kindly, which is fantastic. So let's look at what we've had submitted in advance. So yeah, what advice would you give to someone who is just starting out and can't really afford to be picky about who they work for? So I mentioned this earlier when I was talking. I think, reframe it about whether you're being picky, because it's not picky to make sure that an environment is right for you before you go there. You need to know that it's somewhere that you do want to start out. But as I also said, sometimes you just have to take a job because it's the right time and it's the job you need in that moment. That doesn't mean it's a permanent choice. But still do the research so you know what you're getting into. And if you think that organization might have some issues in a particular area, you might be able to help change that for the next person. So make a conscious decision and have the information, but do what you need to do. I can't be anything other than realistic. Like, we all need to live, and it is difficult and it is a competitive sector, but that doesn't mean that you can't have the information and make decisions based on it. There's a question in the chat about how to get your research into an interview. So the way that I normally do that is through the questions that I ask at the end, because that shows that you've done some research, and often it quite stumps people. So a question I asked in my job interview for my current job after doing my research is, I was reading on your website that you are currently consulting on the next 5 years of forward planning. How do you anticipate in X project that I read about that would be happening in the forward plan? And I was told that I was one of the only people who really clearly showed that they had gone and thought about that and looked at it. So you can use your questions to show that you've done your research, and also think about it in your answers. So if they say a question like, talk to us, could you tell us about a time that you have managed a project with multiple stakeholders, for example? You could then say, a time I've managed a project with multiple stakeholders is ABC. Talk about your project that you've managed and the stakeholders and how you manage them. And then say, this is similar to the project that I've read about you doing. What is that project? So link something in your experience to something that you've read about them, and that shows that you've done your research. Let me know in the chat if that makes sense as an answer to the question. Someone has asked if salary is stated as depending on experience or negotiable. Is that a red flag? Yes, it's the same as competitive. Any information in the salary line that is not numbers is not telling you the salary. Unless, I suppose, they've written 10,000 out in normal words. Not 10,000, that would be quite bad. If they've written it out in words, sure, it's a bit weird. But yeah, anything that isn't just either a explicit number or a range of numbers is not telling you the salary. And sometimes you might see a salary range, and then, dependent on experience, that opens the door wide open for you to have a salary negotiation. So if it says something like 24 to 28,000, depending on experience, make sure that you have thought in advance about your experience, how it matches the job description, and where you excel, so that you can come in if you get offered the job and say to them, the salary for this job is dependent on experience. I have X amount of experience in these key things that you're looking for. The salary, I'd like to see if you could offer me a salary of 26,000, and see where they come back on. They might not, they might be able to offer it to you. So use that as a reason to negotiate. And even if it doesn't say that, still negotiate. It's something that I have in the past I found really difficult. It is not something that feels easy, but then the first time you do it feels so much easier. Should you negotiate in an interview or after you've been offered the job? After you've been offered the job, because at that point they want you, so that's when you have the power. Thinking about when in the process you have power is really important. So yeah, and good people who have had experience of negotiating and it working is great. And the last job I got offered, I was offered a higher salary, and I said no. I turned the job down, and then I had a long conversation with them about a lot of the issues in this presentation that I've given about workplace culture, unions, and they offered me more money, and I said no again because I felt that it wasn't the right thing for me. And it's weird to do that, to turn down a job, and I am very lucky that I was in the position to do so, because I have a job now that is a permanent job, and I appreciate that not everyone is going to have that experience, but it is something to keep in mind. You do have power when they have offered you the job. They want you for a reason. Make sure you have thought about what that reason is and using that to negotiate yourself a salary. How can you find out about workplace culture and workplace values? It's difficult. Word of mouth, talking to people, asking around in your networks for anyone who might have experience of it is probably one of the best ways to do it. And that definitely disadvantages people who are new into the sector. So I would definitely encourage people to find a network, and try and ask that. A lot of the emerging museum professionals groups on Facebook, and some of them have Twitter, they will be a really good source for you. I strongly encourage you to get involved with them. A lot of people will be in those groups who are happy to share information. Other networks like Museum Detox, Museum as Muck, anywhere with a kind of presence where you could ask people these questions. You can get in touch with us at Fair Museum Jobs, and ask us, and we can ask if people might know anything about this organization. You can also look on their website for things like values. Values will often be stated in annual reports. Like, I know that the brand values of my organization are approachable, inspiring, and responsive. And those are values that are important to me in how I deliver my work. So that is something aligned with me that I was able to find. And a lot of the time that will be in the application information, which can help you find out. It is never going to be concrete. You're never going to get a certain bet when you're finding this information and using it. You can only kind of do the best you can with what you have, I think. Is it useful to integrate some of the research about the organization in the covering letter or personal statement to make the application stronger, or should we stick to the job description and person specification? I would say it's sort of a nice to have, but it's not essential, and you really don't want to lay it on thick, I think. So the key thing you need to do in a covering letter and personal statement is address the job description and the person specification. If you don't have room for anything else, don't do it. The key thing to do is that. If you have an extra bit of space where you can add a sentence that shows that you know something about that organization and their work, it's a good thing, but it's unlikely to be a deal breaker if you're replying to the job description points, because that is the key thing you can do. And Lucy would like to add a comment. So please, Lucy, unmute yourself. I'd love to hear from you.
Hi everyone. This is just an anecdote about a job that I applied to and was interviewed for, about how your research can come in. So it was an Arts Council manager job in the Lake District, and a lot of the stuff was like, how would you manage budgets, but also like, how would you, develop frameworks for judging our work. And the first place I was going to go and look at was their previous annual reports. And I would make a really kind of strong thing that if an organisation produces an annual report, go and look at it, and look at what's in it, but also look at what's not there, and be quite critical of it. But this organisation hadn't published. They said they were going to publish annual reports, and they hadn't published any. And this was something that I was then able to bring up in my interview and say, well, I would have done this to find out, compare existing frameworks, but you haven't done this. And it led to quite an interesting discussion where which really actually helped me judge the people who were interviewing me, because they immediately became very resistant. It felt like they were being attacked. And the reason there wasn't a report was because the person who normally did it was the job I was interviewing for. And that's all they had to say. But they were very, it gave me a really poor impression of them. And I was really pleased to not take that job. So I would say annual reports, but if you have like a difficult question, that could actually be like a real game changer in how you see the organization as well.
Yeah, I think there's definitely two things I definitely echo from what Lucy has said. If there is information that is conspicuous by its absence, what does that mean? Is there a reason? And sometimes the reason might just be the person left and it hasn't been able to be published. But sometimes there might be something else going on. So it's worth having a critical think about what that might mean. And then also, yeah, how does an organization respond to criticism in any form is really important. And that's something you might sometimes see on social media. And I am definitely not advocating necessarily for big online pile-ons, because that is not good for the staff that are responsible for social media or any other thing. But how organizations respond when criticized is really important. And you can look at the National Trust recently and how they've been responding to criticism, I think is really interesting. And it can sometimes change how you feel about an organization when you see that kind of thing going on. So yeah, I think Lucy's right to point out the things that she said for sure. When negotiating, how is this best done? Email, face to face? You're unlikely to have the opportunity to negotiate face to face, especially at the moment, but pretty much all of the time. Face to face is very unlikely. You're much more likely to be doing it by phone or email. Normally, the person will need to go away and find out information as part of the negotiation. So you might ask for 26,000, they will then need to go away and work out if they can afford 26,000 or if it's in their budget or if they think it's viable. So email or phone are both I think fine, but I definitely would say don't expect to get the answer in the conversation necessarily. Sometimes you might, but you won't always. So I think that's just something to keep in mind. Another question that's coming from Eventbrite is it enough to know more general details about a site or museum when interviewing, or is it better to know fewer, more specific details? I would say the real answer to this question is about knowing details relevant to the job that you're interviewing for. And those could be general or they could be specific. So I work in collection systems, and I would certainly want to know, as part of my research, what collection system they're using at that site, at that organization, which is a general detail. But I might also want to know some more specific details, like exactly what projects they're working on with that system and where they are in those projects, if I can find that out in advance. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. So I'd like to know a bit of a mixture, but the key things to know are what's useful for the job and know some facts that you feel able to use in your answers. You could know 100 things, but you're not going to be able to use 100 things in your interview. So get a few things and deploy them as needed, I think is what I would say to that question. There's a bit of is asking what systems they use before your interview. Okay, yeah, I think it probably is. Sometimes you don't need to ask. So for example, if your organization uses any axial system, and I can say this because I know that this is the case because I currently use an axial system. If you go to the axial website, you can search through all axial customers and see what systems they use. So look up your organization on the axial website if you're in collection systems, and you'll see if they use any systems that are supplied by axial. So you won't even have to ask if it's one of those, but I think it is okay to ask, and often it will be in the job description or the person spec. They might be asking for someone with experience of modes, MIMSI, CALM, Museum Index Plus, AdLib. I'm just listing all the systems now. They might be asking specifically for that experience. So I think it's okay to ask because it just gives you a bit more information, and it's not it's unlikely to be a deal breaker for them or for you. There's a bit of conversation in the chat around, yeah, I think there's a really good point here. When it comes to pickiness, I think of it like this. Is it worth the toll it will take? i.e., if this job is going to exhaust me to the point that it will impact my studies, my mental health, my ability to work on things that will help me grow, is it worth it? I think that's an incredibly important point, and it echoes something that came up through the Eventbrite questions. Someone says they've had a number of jobs where they've been disappointed, including something that was really bad for their mental health, because research can often be a curated version of that organization or that person's best self. How can you really know what an organization is like before you get there? How many questions can you ask at interview before they become suspicious? There is a limit to how many questions you can ask in an interview. And that's why my biggest, if you only take one thing from this session, I would say decide what's important to you. What are the 3 things that are most important for you to find out about an organization, and focus your research on that, and answering those and getting the answers to those questions in the interview. You're never going to be able to know everything, and you're never going to be able to know if what they're telling you is 100% true. So focus in on what you can find out and use that, I think, the best you can. And you're definitely right in the chat where you're saying no job is ever going to be worth your mental health. That is 100% true. We would say the same about physical health. You should never jeopardize any of your health for a job. You just can't do it. It isn't going to result in a net gain for you. It's not a good idea. Is research a good way to do a speculative application or getting in touch with an organization? For example, reaching out to an organization saying you're interested in them because of the various things they do. In the UK museum job market, speculative applications are very rarely going to get you anywhere. Almost every organization is going to have a formal application process that they have to follow. So speculative applications don't do anything. Reaching out for an informational interview with a particular person is different. If there is something you are interested in, and for your professional development, you want to know more about it, reaching out to someone to find out is a good idea. But you need to have something specific in mind that you're asking about. So for example, if someone emailed me because they are really interested in collection systems and really want to think about their career, would I mind speaking to them about my career path? I would absolutely do that. But if someone just reached out to me saying, I'm really interested in the BFI and I guess I like archives, can you talk to me? I wouldn't be able to do that because I might not be the best person from the amount of information given. I would pick something specific and use that as a way to get more information. But be aware that people are busy individuals. They might not always be able to give you what it is that you want. And if people feel that you have an ulterior motive in making that approach and getting that discussion, that's not a good thing. So make sure your reasons for wanting to do that are really clear and communicate those to the person that you'd like to speak to. I think that's really important. And yeah, Lucy is pointing out as well in the chat that we talked a lot about transferable skills. We had a collections management session yesterday and we talked a lot about that. And I'm using collections management examples because that is my experience and my background, but this applies to anything that you might be doing as well. So we have come to the end of our time. As I say, the key thing I'd love you to take away is deciding the things that are most important to you and how you want to use them. And yeah, think about it for partnering and for research projects. I will just add very quickly, the reason we chose at Fair Museum Jobs to partner with GEM, Group for Education in Museums, on this summit is because we could see their values reflected the values that we have, and we were working in an aligned way, and we were both passionate about the same things. So it completely follows through for partnering, community work, working with organizations, not just in terms of kind of job applications and your own personal career. Absolutely follows through. Thank you, Francis. I'm really glad that you say that. So everyone, thank you so much for your time. I feel like I've talked a lot, but I hope I've answered your questions. And if I haven't, get in touch with us on Twitter or email or Instagram, and we will be publishing this later. And also we have the blog about this where there's a bit more information as well. Thank you all so much for joining me this morning.